Hey everyone, in this video we are going to learn how we can execute system commands using Python. For that, we will be needing subprocess library. Now subprocess is a library that enables any Python developers or Python program to execute system commands and use this output to as per your needs. So to use subprocess, we have to import the subprocess library into our program. For that, we have a keyword called import. Now I'm going to import that subprocess into our code by typing import space the library name and here it is subprocess. As you can see, I have successfully imported that subprocess into our program. Now I want to execute some system commands using this library. Now to execute system commands, we have a method which is predefined in subprocess, which is call. So I can just use call method by typing subprocess dot call, and here it requires two arguments. The first argument will be the command that we want to execute, and the second argument will be shell parameter, which can be true, either true or false. So I'm going to type a simple command. Let's say who am I, and I'm going to type shell equals true. Now this shell equals true means that subprocess will know that okay, I have to execute this command onto the terminal or onto the console. So now as we have successfully implemented the call method, let's try to run this to see if we got any error or not. Perfect. As we can see that the command is getting executed perfectly, and to confirm that we can execute the same command on our command prompt. So let's execute that same command, which was who am I, and as you can see, it's working fine. Now there is one problem in this subprocess.call method. The problem is that I cannot store this the output into any variable. Now, why it is important? Because we want the output to store somewhere into the remote computer or the victim machine, and then we will get back that output onto the attacker machine. So let's say if I try to save this method result into a variable, what happens? Let's try to save this in a variable, let's say output. Now I want to print this to see what happens. Now if I try to run it, as you can see, we get zero. We get zero. Now you are also seeing this desktop slash Fayyaz Ahmed. This is because this subprocess call method is printing that uh, command onto our terminal, but it is not storing into a variable. It is not allowing us to store that output in a variable. This is the reason why when I try to print that output, we get a zero. Now this zero is indicating here that the command is getting executed successfully. But we don't want that. We want the whole output to be saved in a variable, and then we can manipulate that variable as per our choice. For that, we have another method which is subprocess.checkoutput. Now checkoutput will take the two arguments as well. The first argument is going to be the command that we want to execute, and the second argument, as as you may have guessed, is shell equals to true or false. So we are going to use shell equals to true as well because we want to execute that command on the terminal. Now that method subprocess.checkoutput is going to return the data in byte format, and that byte is containing the whole information about the command that we executed. And that command is going, then we can save that command into any variable, and then we can manipulate the variable as per our choice, and we can transfer the variable back to us by using some kind of connection that we are going to see in the next videos. For now, let's try to use check output here. Perfect. As you can see, we have used subprocess.check output. Again, we have a first argument, which is the command that we want to execute, and the second argument is the shell equals to true. Okay, now let's try to run this program. Now, as you can see, we get our data as it is, but there is one new problem. The problem is that this B is containing that this data is under B. Now, B is indicating that this data is byte. Now, we want our byte to be decoded into string format so that we can read it perfectly. And for that, we are going to use a method of string which is .decode. And this decode method will decode that data back to in the readable format. For that, we are going to use output.decode, and now we are going to type UTF-8 here, and we are going to click on run. And as you can see, we get the same output as we got in while executing the whoami command onto the command prompt. So I hope you all understand how we can use subprocess library. In the next video, we are going to see how we can get connection from two computers. Thank you. Hey everyone. In this video, we are going to create our own listener that is going to listen for incoming connection, and by which we are going to execute commands on the target machine. So let's click on this file and let's create a new Python file and named it as listener. Now, to create our listener, we have to first import a library which is socket. Now, socket will allow us to communicate between two computers over TCP connection. Okay, so we are going to import socket, and first of all, we have to create our instance of the socket object. So for that, we are going to create a variable. Let's name it listener, and let's create a object. We have to type socket dot socket, and we have to type socket dot af underscore inet and socket dot sock stream. Now what this two does, they simply af underscore inet stands for that we are going to create connection between IPv4, means the IP address, and socket.sock stream simply allow us to establish a TCP connection. Okay, so if you want to read more about what is this TCP connection and what is this IPv4, I'm dropping the link in the reference or in the resources. You can check it out from there. Now we have our instance of socket created and stored in listener variable. Now we are going to use its bind method, and here we are going to provide the local host and 4444. Now basically localhost is the IP address. Here you can write your own IP address from command prompt, or you can just simply type localhost, and the next parameter is port, and here we are specifying 4444. This listener.bind will open a port on localhost which will be 4444, and from there the client is going to get connection. So the client will send request on this localhost slash 444, and our socket server is going to accept it. Okay, now let's start the listener. Can do that by typing listener.listen, and after that, when we get a connection, first of all, let's print something like server has started. Server is started. Now, when someone can get connected to our server or listener, there will be two data that is going to be created. First is the connection, and second will the address. So the connection is going, we are going to handle every transferring of data through the connection value, and we are going to use the address value to get the exact location of the machine. For that, I'm going to specify address. Sorry, we have to specify connection comma address equals to listener dot accept. Now this is going to accept the connection, incoming connection, which will be generated by the client, and it will divide it into two variables. The first one is going to be connection, which is going to handle all the request and response, which is going to transfer the data over the IPv4 over the TCP connection, and address, which is going to store the address of that particular connection. And now we are ready to go, and we can type just, we can print got connection from address format address. Good. Now just click on this run to see if everything is working fine or not. Okay, so we have an issue here. So we can just click on right click and just click on run listener. And as you can see, the server has started successfully. So this is it for creating the listener file as of now. And now we are going to create the client or the payload file that is going to execute and that is going to get a connection from our server. So in the last video, we have created our listener that is going to accept incoming connection by the client. Now let's create a client or a payload. Now what a payload will do is basically connect to that listener and then receive commands and execute that command on the remote machine. But in this case, we are just going to create a simple payload that is going to connect to the listener. That's it. We are not doing anything as of now. So for that, we have to import socket again, and we have to create again instance of the socket. We can do this by typing socket or socket. The same line as in the listener, we can just copy it and paste it here. And now all we have to do is just type payload.connect and we have to specify the address. Now the first argument will accept the IP address. So here it is localhost and the port number on which it is going to be connected. So here it is 4444. Note, because we are binding our listener address to localhost 444, we must specify the same address in the payload so that it get connected as we expected it to be. If we specify any other ports or any other IP address, it will not be connected. It's simply because the server is running on this localhost on port number 4444. So I hope you are clear. Now let's start the listener. First of all, let's print something when it gets connected. Sorry, like finally I am connected. And in the listener we have this: when any client get connected in line number 7, it will just print got connection from and the address in line number 8. Great. So now let's start the listener file. Now as we can see, the server has started, and now let's try to run this payload file. Perfect. As you can see, finally I am connected to displayed, which means that this code is working fine. And if we click on the listener, we can see that it displaying a message that got connection from this IP address from this port. So basically, this IP address from this port is connecting to this localhost and this port. Okay, so we will successfully able to connect our payload to our listener. So I hope you understand how we can create our simple payload and listener right now. The listener is only accepting incoming connection and the payload is just connecting to that listener. We are not doing anything apart from just connection as of now. We will do it in the next video. So in the next video, we are going to see how we can transfer simple data or simple text between this listener and a payload. Hey everyone. So in the last video, we have successfully created our listener.py and payload.py. But right now our listener.py and payload.py is not sending any data between them. So in this video, we are going to transfer some data between listener.py and payload.py and see how we can transfer the data using socket. Okay. So let us try to send some data by the listener to the payload. Like when we got a connection from the listener and the payload, the listener is going to send some data and the payload will receive that data and print it on the console. Right. So let's say I want to send like hello world to the payload.py. So what I can do is I can just type connection dot send, and here I'm going to specify the data that I want to transfer. Please note that connection.send method will always requires a data in byte format. So if we are trying to send some string to the payload, we have to convert it into byte. So we can do that by just typing b single quotes and here hello world. Perfect. So now this connection.send method will send that hello world in byte format to the payload.py, and we have to receive that data from payload.py and we have to print it on the terminal. As I have as I have mentioned in the previous video, that connection is going to be used for transferring data, and address will store the location of that client or that connection. Okay, so now let's go to our payload.py payload.py and let me just delete all this. Good. Now we want our payload when we get a connection from the when we successfully establish a connection between listener.py and payload.py, we want the payload to receive the data which is given by the listener. So we are going to wait till the listener sends any data to the payload, right? So for that we have a method which is payload dot receive, and here we have to specify the byte size. So I can just do 2048, and now this line will wait till the listener gives any data to the payload.py, and when payload.py will receive that data, we want it to print it on the terminal. So for that we have to save this payload.receive into some kind of variable, and which is, as you may have guessed, is going to be in byte format, because we are sending the data from the listener in byte format. So we want the data to be decoded in original string, right? So we have a method of byte which is dot decode, that is going to decode the byte into UTF-8, which is the readable string format. So now I want to print that output and decode it into normal string, readable string. Perfect. So this is all we have to do in order to transfer data between listener.py and payload.py. So let me just run this listener.py to see what happens. Hmm. As you can see, the listener.py file is working perfectly. And now I have to run this payload.py and see what happens. As you can see, we get our data transferred from the listener.py to our payload.py. As you can see, in listener.py, we have sent this data, hello world, and in the payload.py, we have successfully received that data by payload.receive method, and we were successfully able to store that into an output variable, and finally we print it by decoding that output into UTF-8. And as you can see, we were successfully able to print that hello world into our terminal, which means that we were successfully able to transfer data between listener.py and payload.py. So in the next video, we are going to create a simple chat application that is going to send data and receive data, and then after receiving the data, it is going to print on the terminal. So it will be very easy. So thanks for watching till now. Hey everyone. So in the last video, we have successfully transferred the data between the listener and the payload. In this video, we are going to create a simple chat application that is going to send some data to the listener to the payload, and then the payload will accept that data and print it on the terminal, and then the payload will send the data back to the listener, and listener will do it as well. Okay, so for that, we are going to take an input in infinite loop, so that whenever we type something, the data will get sent to the payload or vice versa, and then we again prompt to get type some input. So I think that's how chat application works. So let us start coding. So let me erase this one, and let's type while true. So this is going to run an infinite loop, or we can also do while true without this small brackets. So while true, and now we are going to take some input. So let's say um, chat equals to input, and let's do this. And when the user gives something input, we are going to send that input to the payload file. So we are going to type connection dot send chat. Now all done from here, and here we have to write while true as well. Let me delete this one. Let's type while true, and now we are going to, first of all, the listener is going to send some data to the payload. So the payload will have to receive the data first, and then after it is going to send the data, right? So let me do this. So I'm going to receive data equals to payload dot receive 2048. Nice. And we are going to print that data on the terminal. And we also know that the payload.receive method is going to return a byte, and we have a method of byte that is going to decode that byte back to UTF-8 or readable format, right? So we are done from here. And after printing the data, the payload is going to ask for some input. And after that, the payload is going to send this input back to the client, or you can say the listener. Payload.send chat. Perfect. And also we have to do something here. So after sending the data, we have to wait, or we have to receive the data. So we will be writing receive data equals to connection dot receive 2048, and we are going to print that data on the console as well. Receive data dot decode UTF-8. Now let's try to run this. Now as you can see, the server is started, and we are going to start the payload as well. And now you can see we got connected, and now that the payload is waiting for some data which should be given by the listener. And as you can see here, listener, we are at the input phase, so we are at line number 11 now. So let's say hi there, and let's hit enter. Okay, so as you can see, we got an error. This is simply because a byte like object is required, not string. As you can see in line number 12, we are sending the data chat to the payload. But the problem here is that since, as we have discussed earlier, that the send method is always accepting a byte, not a string or not anything else apart from byte data, right? So we have to convert this chat into byte. And for that, we have a function called byte, and we're just going to use this function. So in the first argument, we are providing the data which we are going to send, which we have to encode in byte, and we are going to specify the encoding type, which is UTF-8. Now let's try to run this again. Let me just stop all the processes. Now let's try to run this again, and run the payload file as well. And as you can see, we are again got connected. Both listener.py and payload.file is connected perfectly. And now let's try to send some data to payload. Hi. And as you can see, we get our hi message to the payload.py file. And now, as you can see, the payload file is at this line number 9, and it is asking for us to give something input so that it can send it back to the listener. So let's say I'm typing hey. Okay, so we got the same error. This is simply because we have to specify the byte data type here as well. So we are going to do that by typing bytes and file name, and the encoding type is going to be UTF-8. Let's try to run this again to see if everything is working fine or not. Let's try to run listener.py and payload.py. Let's try to send hi, and as you can see, we got the message hi. And now let's try to send hey. And as you can see, we got the hey message from the payload to the listener as well. So now this is just a simple chat application by which I am demonstrating that how we can transfer data between the listener.py file and payload.py file. Please note that whenever you try to send any data to any two Python program using socket, the data must be in byte format. If the data is not in byte format, then we have to convert it so that we will be able to send that data to the between two files, right? So I think we are good for this video. And now in the next video, we are going to execute some system commands remotely. Thank you. Hey everyone. So in this video, we are going to transfer the commands that we are going to execute, or we can say the commands output that we are going to execute on the payload to the listener file. So let me delete all this. And now let me delete this. Okay, so we have to import sub process here, the payload file of process. Good. And in the listener, after the connection, we want the listener to send some commands onto the payload file, and the payload is going to execute that command and send back the output to us. For that, we are going to run the loop in which we are going to take input and let's say enter a command, and we are going to send this command to the payload file. For that, we are going to use connection.send cmd, and we have to encode this in byte. Good. And now, after connection, we want the sub process to wait for us to receive data, and it will execute that data on the terminal using sub process, and it will send back the output to us. So we are going to do this in loop, and let's say command equals to payload dot receive. Since we are receiving the data given by the listener 2048, and we are going to execute the command using this command data that is given by the listener. So we are going to use subprocess dot check output, and here we are going to pass command, and we are going to type shell equals true, and we have to save this output into some kind of variable. So we are going to use output equals to subprocess dot check output and the command. Now here is one problem, that the command argument must be in string, but as we know that this payload dot receive method is going to get the data in byte format, since we are sending the data in byte format. So we have to decode it in UTF-8, or you can say string. For that, we have to type cmd equals to cmd.decode and provide the encoding type, which is UTF-8. And I think we are good for now. And one thing, we have to send back this output to the listener file. For that, we are going to use payload.send, and we are going to simply provide the output. As we know earlier, that check output method will return the data in byte format. So we don't need to encode the output to byte again because the data is already in byte. But when we are receiving the data here, let's say we are receiving the data in output variable, output equals to connection dot receive, and specify the size. Now it will be in byte format, so we have to decode it back to the UTF-8 and print it on the terminal. So we can directly go for output dot decode, and we can specify UTF-8. Now that's all we have to do in order to execute command remotely through a connection. Now let's try to run this listener.py file and see what happens. As you can see, the server is started, and let's try to run this payload file to see what happens. And as you can see, the payload is started as well. And now in the listener, we got a prompt asking for enter a command. And let's say if I enter who am I, hit enter. And as you can see, we get the who am I command output back to us. So the both of the files listener.py and payload.py is working perfectly. Now in order to stop this listener and payload, we have to do one thing. We have to add a breakpoint in this loop so that whenever we type, let's say whenever we type quit, the listener and the payload should quit and quit their connection. So let me stop all of these processes, stop all, and now let's try to do this. If sorry, here we have to try if cmd equals to quit, and now we are going to break it out of the loop. First of all, we are going to close the connection dot close, and then we are going to break the loop. Okay. So that's all we have to that's all we need to do in order to close that while loop, close that listener file. And now let's try to run this again. And let me just comment this out. We can use hash to comment the line. And now let's try to run this again. And as you can see in the listener.py, we didn't got our connection. Okay, sorry, we got our connection. And now let's try to execute a command, who am I? And as you can see, it's working fine. And if I try to type quit now, I think we have given quit, right? And if I try to quit, as you can see, we successfully get out of the loop and the connection got executed, terminated. Now there is one problem here. As you can see, the payload is still running. So we need the payload to stop as well. So for that, we are going to do one thing. We are going to, before closing the connection, we are going to send this quit to the payload. So we are going to do something like connection.send, and we are going to send the string, or rather than we can do like quit. And now when the payload is receiving, when the payload will receive that data which is sent by the listener, and if the data contains quit, so we are going to close the connection. So let me type this. If cmd equals to, so since we given the data in bytes, so we have to compare it in bytes as well, or we can decode it. So you can do as per your choice, but right now here I'm going to specify the byte, and let's close the connection. We can do this by typing payload.close. So that's it. And we have to also break out of this loop. And now I think everything should work fine. Let's try to run this again. As you can see, the server has started. Let's try to run this. And as you can see, we get a connection from this payload. And now if I try to type who am I, we are getting the output as we are getting before. And now let's type quit. And as you can see, we successfully closed the connection from the listener as well as the payload without any errors. Hey everyone, so far we have created a listener and payload that is going to execute system commands on any remote computer in which the payload is going to run. So now let's test that payload.py onto my main machine, and uh, in the virtual machine we are going to start the listener.py file. So my virtual machine is going to act as an attacker machine, and my main machine is going to be the victim machine. So before doing that, we have to make some configurations, like we have to specify a IP address from which these two computers, my virtual machine and attacker machine, is connected. Right now, we are not attacking on wide area network or on the internet, so we need this to be done. So for that, we can just go to command prompt and type the command, which is ipconfig. And as we can see, this is the IP address from which my virtual machine is connected. Copy this and let's save it here. Perfect. Now let me just send this payload.py file into my machine. So we can do it by just visiting the file location, and we can find it over here. Okay, so here is our payload.py file, and now I want to copy this file and paste it here. Now as you can see, my main machine is running Windows 11, and we have the attacker machine running as Windows 10. So let me start the listener.py, and as you can see, the listener has started successfully. And now we want our payload.py to execute on the main machine, or you can say the victim machine. So let me just try to run this in my main machine. and nothing suspicious happens. But if we check here, okay, so I accidentally opened my IDE here, but we want to execute this Python file. So we can do this by typing, we can do this by visiting to Python. And now we are going to open with Python. And as you can see, nothing is happening as much of now. And if you go to the server, nothing is happening at all. So there must be some kind of issue. We need to solve it. And the problem is that we need to connect to the same IP address that that is starting the listener. So we have to just paste this as well. Paste the IP address here as well. You can just copy this same IP address on which the listener is running, and I'm going to paste it. And now let's try to run this again. What I can do is I can just fix it from this payload.py file in the main machine. We can just provide the IP address here. Now everything should work fine. And let's try to run this. And as you can see, the server is started. Now let's try to run this payload.py file. We are going to run it with Python. And as you can see, nothing is happening as much of now. And if we go to our Windows 10 machine, you can see that we got a connection from 192.168.47.1 from this port. Now let's try to execute a simple command, which is whoami, to see if it is working perfectly or not. And as you can see, it's given me an output Fayyaz Ahmed backslash Fayyaz. And now let's try to run the same command on the main machine to see if everything is working fine or not. You can type cmd and let's type whoami. And as you can see, we got the same output as we got in the virtual machine, or you can say the attacker machine, which means that right now our listener.py and payload.py is working fine. Now let me try to type another command, which is dir. It is used to display order directly in the particular location. And as you can see, we have successfully grabbed the whole directory list of the target machine. So let me just exit it now, and let me try to quit this. And as you can see, the payload.py file also stopped here, and we were successfully able to execute system commands on the remote computer through socket and subprocess. Hey everyone, so in the last video, we have tested our listener.py and payload.py, and we have also identified a problem, which was this size limit. So in line number 18, as you can see, we can receive data up to maximum size of 2048 or any given size that we specify in this receive method, right? But what we want is to keep receiving the data till it's get the actual size of the data will be equals to the uh, data that we have received, right? So we want to apply some kind of logic that will keep receiving the data till the size of the data and the size of the actual data which was sent by the payload will become equal, right? So for that we are going to do some more coding. Like, we are first of all going to add a function here. Let's say receive data, and this receive data function will first of all receive the original size of the particular output of the command, which is going to be executed by payload.py. So we are going to type original size equals to connection dot receive and specify the size. And as we all know that this receive method will accept the data in byte format, so I'm going to decode it into string by typing decode under small bracket. Inside it I'm going to type UTF-8, and now we have the original size in string format, but we want our original size to be in integer so that we can perform any sort of logic through that integer. So we are going to convert this, or you can say typecast this into integer. So we can do this like original size and perfect. So now our original size is in integer format, right? And now, once we get the original size, we want to keep receive the data till our original size equals to the size of our data, right? So let me try to do one thing. Let's say data equals to payload dot receive 048, and we are going to apply a loop here. Sorry, it's going to be connection dot receive, and now let's apply a logic. While length of the data that we are receiving is not equals to the original size of the data, we are going to keep receiving the data, right? So data equals to data plus mm, connection dot receive 2048, and once this loop completes, we are going to return the data. So this is all we need to do in order to fix the issue in line number 27. So now we have to do some coding in payload.py as well. So let me just edit it. So as you can see, there it is. And now we have to create a function here as well. Let's create a function like send data, and it is going to accept one parameter. Let's say output data, and the first thing that it will send is the size of the data to our listener, right? So we are going to find the size of the data. Size of data equals to length of output data. Okay, and now we want the size of data variable to be sent to the listener.py, right? But there is one problem, as we know that payload.send method is going to accept the data only in byte, so we have to encode it in byte first. But before that, we also need to typecast the data into string, because we know this length function is going to return the data in integer. So we are going to convert that integer into string, and then after we are going to convert that string into byte. So let me do this. Size of data equals to string size of data, and now we are going to send this data. So payload dot send, and we can encode that data into bytes. Size of data, and the encoding type is UTF-8. Perfect. So the first thing that we are going to send is the size of the data. After that, we are going to send the actual data. So here it is, output underscore data underscore data, and control plus S. And now we are going to remove this line. Instead, we are going to use a function that we defined here. So let's say send underscore data, and inside it, we are going to pass output underscore data. Perfect. So we are going to control plus S again, and we have to use the function that we defined here in this line as well. So we are going to do something like output equals to receive data, and that's it. That's all we have to do in order to fix this issue of size. So this function right now, it will keep receiving the data till the size of our data and the size of original size will be equal. And after the both of them become equal, it will return the data which was sent by the payload. Now let me try to run this code. Okay, so the server has started, and let me try to run this Python file again, payload file again, sorry. See what happens. Okay, let's see if we got our connection or not. And as you can see, we successfully got our connection. Let's try to hit who am I first to see if we broke our code or not. And as you can see, we actually break our code, right? So there is this error in line number 12, this line. So we must be doing something wrong here. Payload.send byte, size of data, UTF-8, and size of data. Let's me check the spelling. Output data. Okay, sorry. So we have to erase this. Okay, now because we are sending the output variable, right? So or we can also do something like this, like output data equals to output, or we can just leave it as it is. So let me try to run this again. Py. Let's try to run payload.py, Python. And as we can see, we got a connection. Let's try to type whoami. Perfect. Now our whoami command is working perfectly. Let's try to do dir. As we know, we were not able to get dir in one data in the previous video. So we are going to try this now. And as you can see, we successfully got the whole data greater than the size of 2048. This is because this receive data function is keep receiving the data till the size of our data received equals to the original size of the data. And after that, we are going to return the data. And this data is stored in output variable and we are printing it in line number 28. So I hope you understand how we fixed our issue. Hey everyone. So in the last video, we successfully solved our problem of this limit of size by creating two functions in listener.py and in payload.py. So the payload.py will first going to send the size of the actual data and then after it is going to send the whole data, right? Whereas in listen.py, first of all, it will accept the size of the data which is sent by the payload and it will keep receiving the data, the actual data, till the size of the payload is equal to the size of the data received. And after the both of them becomes equal, it will just going to return the data. Okay, everything seems to work fine here, except there is one minor issue which can be very troublesome if we are going to apply this listener.py and payload.py in real world. So let me demonstrate it to you. First of all, let me try to run this listener.py. Okay, and now let's try to run this payload.py, but this time I'm going to do it in terminal. And let me try to run this payload.py. And I think we got our connection. Let us try to execute some commands. Whoami dir. Okay, everything seems to work fine. But let's say what happens if I try dir and I accidentally add an extra r in this input. So as we all know, that dirr is not a command in Windows. So if I try to hit this and if I try to press enter with this, as you can see, we get an error and our program terminates abnormally. So this means that the connection that we have created is broken now. So we don't want that actually. Instead, we want the payload.py to recognize that okay, this command is not acceptable by the Windows, and it is going to send the listener that hey, you have written a wrong command. Please try again. Something similar to this. So for doing this, we are going to use the concept of exception handling. So we have to modify our payload.py a bit. So let me edit it with Notepad. You can use PyCharm as well. And here we are going to modify the code in this line. So as we know that this line is responsible for executing commands. So we are going to put this line in try block and okay, and we are going to do something like except. And as we know, as we can see from here, that whenever the command is not recognized by Windows, it is going to throw this exception, which is subprocess.call process error. We are going to copy this and we are going to paste it here. And if we got any exception, or if we got this particular exception, meaning that our command is not recognizable by the Windows, then we are going to call this function, and inside this function we are going to send a wrong command. That's it. And we have to do one more thing, else, meaning that if we don't get any error, then simply send the data, which means that if you don't get any error, then it is simply it is simply meaning that this line of code getting executed successfully and sub process recognize that code. Now let me save this and let's try to run this code again. And oh, sorry, I have to stop it. Let's try to run the listener first. Let's try to run this first, and now try to run this payload.py. Oh, sorry, we have to move to desktop and let's try to run python payload.py. Or instead, we can just run it directly through here by right clicking on this Python icon. As you can see, we got our Python started and we get the connection as well. And now let's see if I try to write the same code again, dir. And as you can see, instead of terminating the connection, our payload.py successfully gives us a warning message that, hey, this is a wrong command. And if I try to execute dir, which is a valid command in Windows, so it is giving me the output. So I hope you understand how we can solve this problem as well. Thank you. Hey everyone. So in this video, we are going to add our first functionality into our listener.py and payload.py. And the first functionality is going to be the ability to change directory. Right now, our payload can execute system commands on the remote computer. However, it is not currently able to change directory between one file to another. So we are going to give this functionality to our payload.py. And for that, we are going to use a library which is known as OS. And the method that we are going to use inside OS is os.chdr. And now ch.dir stands for change directory. So our logic is very simple. So whenever we type something like this in our listener, like say cd and the folder name, our payload should change the directory to this folder. It's that simple. So we are going to use this logic. So the first thing that we are going to do is write a condition here that else if cmd indexing and who equals to cd, then first of all we are going to send the command send not send uh, bytes command utf-8, and then we are not going to wait for any data to be received. Instead, we are just going to continue our program. And now, as you can see, I'm using the concept of slicing here because we know that cd, the character c is on index 1 and the character d is on index 2. So anything that starts from these two index uh, is equals to the cd character. Then we are going to run this command. So we are going with connection.send. It first of all it is going to send the command, and then it is going to continue our command without going to line number 29 till end. So let me remove this. So that's all we need to do inside this listener.py. And now let's open our payload.py with our PyCharm, or you can also use Notepad as per your choice. And now we are going to add another condition here, else if cmd, again we are going to use indexing equals to cd, then we are going to change directory. So we are going to do something like os.chdr and the directory name. But before that, we need to import OS into our program. So we are going to do import OS, and OS library also comes pre-installed in payload in Python. So we don't need to do anything here. And now let's say if I do something like this, let's say our input is our command is cd space my file or my folder. Let's say my folder. Now we know that the CD is of length 2 and C is on index 0, D is on index 1, plus there is additional space. So the additional space is going to be on this index 2, and anything after index 2 is going to be the folder name. So we are going to do this logic here. So cmd, so the starting length of the string should be after index 2, and the os.chdr method is going to change the directory of our program to that particular directory given by the listener. So that's all we need to do in order to change directory. And now let's try to run this program. Now let's try to run listener.py, and after that let me just try to run payload.py. So I'm going to run it through uh, terminal, but before that let us see if we broke our code or not. I guess we missed some point, and which was yes. Now one thing that you must note is that here we have not decoded our command to string. So here we need to either put this in byte, or we can decode it right after receiving the data. So I'm going to cut this line and I'm going to paste it over here. Now everything should work fine, except there is one more issue, that now this line has decoded the command to string. So we don't need to compare our command with bytes. So we can just remove B, and now everything should work fine. Now let me try to run this payload.py. Okay, and now you can see we got the connection. Let's try dir. Okay, and now let's try to change our directory to test folder. So we are going to do cd space test underscore folder. Now let's try to hit enter, and let's try to again dir, and as you can see we got one error. Let's see what it is. And as you can see, the system cannot find the path specified test folder, and as you can see there's one extra space over here, which means that since c and d is of at c is at index 0 and d is at index 1, and this extra space is at index 2, so we need anything after that too. So we need our file, and if our file is going to start from index 3, right, so we have to provide 3 here instead of 2. And now let's try to run this again. Now let me clear this, and now let's try to run the listener again, and let's try to run payload again, payload.py. As you can see, we again got the connection. Let's try to dir first, and let's try to change the directory to test folder again, and let's try to dir, and again we get the command, again we get the issue. And I think this is very basic issue. Basically our command is going to this line. After running this, the program is going to this try except, so it is going to execute the command, which we don't want, because we have already executed our command here. So we can just do it continue, and now for the final time let's try to run this again. Our server is started. Let's try to run payload.py, and we got the connection. Let's try to hit dir. Now everything should work fine. Let's try to change the directory to test folder. Let's try to hit dir again, and as you can see we successfully changed our directory to test folder. And now we can go back to our directory by typing two dots, and if I hit again dir, and as you can see we just shifted from the former directory to the previous directory. And again if I type anything else, it is not broken, which means that our code is working fine. And let's try to quit this. Perfect, our code is working like magic. So in this video you understand that how we can add a change directory functionality through OS library. Hey everyone, so in this video we are going to handle one more exception which comes from the CHDIR, or the change directory functionality. So let me demonstrate it to you. So first of all you will understand what is the exception, and then we'll try to fix it. So as you can see the server is started. Now let's try to run payload.py. And again, I'm going to run it with the terminal python space payload.py. Now, let's try to open our listener again. We got the connection. Let's try to execute any simple commands. Mi. And now let's try to change directory. So if I try to change directory to this test folder, test underscore folder, as you can see, we were successfully able to change the directory. But what happens if I try to change the directory which is not even there? Like here, as you can see, there is no particular folder or any directory here. So if I try to change anything here, let's say not available, and as you can see, there is no folder or directory named as not available. So if I try to hit enter again, as you can see, nothing happens. But now if I try to enter any other command, let's say dir, and as you can see, we broke our code, and now our code get terminated abnormally. So this is because we are not handling the case that if there is no directory in this particular location, then we are going to just return nothing or a error like, hey, there is no such file. So we are going to do something like this. So it's actually quite easy to fix this issue. All we have to do is just go to this payload, and now we are going to do something like this. So let's say if we were successfully able to execute this code, let me put this into try block, and let me just add the exception as well. So we need to see the exception, and again it was file not found error. So we are going to copy this, and now let me paste it here. And if we don't get any file, then we are just going to simply pass. So don't do anything. And if the command gets successfully executed, then we are going to send something to the payload indicating that, hey, we get the command executed successfully. So this is send data in bytes, change directory, and we are going to save it. Now let's try to again visit our listener.py, and here we have to go to this line, okay, and we are going to type something like this: receive data is equals to receive data function, and let me just change the variable name so that we don't get confused. So let's say receive is equal to receive data, and we are going to print it on the terminal. Print receive dot decode utf-8. And also we are going to do one thing here as well. So let's say if there is no file or no directory through which we can traverse, so we are going to just return something like this: send bytes changed successfully. Oh, sorry, not changed successfully. We are going to do something like this: file not found. And that's it. That's all we need to do in order to handle this type of exception. Now let's try to run this again. Let me try to run listener.py. Let's try to run payload.py. Sorry, let's try to run payload.py. And as you can see, we got the connection. Let's try to say who am I. And as you can see, our commands are working fine. Now let's try to traverse to this test folder. So let's change our directory from current location to this folder, and as you can see, we get a message indicating that our directory is changed. So let me dir it, and as you can see, we are successfully in the new location that we have provided, which was test folder. Now let's try to specify a path or a directory which is not there. So let's try to be not available. Let's try to hit enter, and as you can see, we got one error here. So we need to see what was the problem again. And here you can see send is not defined. So let me just visit this so we can see what was our function again. So it was send data. So we need to do send data here instead of send. It was my mistake actually. So sorry. Now let's try to run this again. and everything should work fine now. Now let's try to run this again, and as you can see we get a connection. Let's try to do dir. Let's try to traverse to test underscore folder, and as you can see we get a message indicating that our directory is changed. Now let's try to dir. Now again let's try to change to a directory which is not there. Let's say not available. uh, Now let's try to enter, and as you can see we get a message that our file was not there, which means that we solved the exception handling successfully. And as you can see we didn't broke our code, and we are still in the connection. So let's try to dir again, and as you can see we were successfully able to execute command without breaking the code. And now we can just go back to the directory using cd dot dot, and as you can see everything is working fine now. So let us check if we handled all the exceptions properly or not. So let's try to execute some command which is not supported by Windows, something like this. And as you can see, we are successfully getting this error, hey wrong command. Now let's try to change directory. So we have already checked it. And now we want something like, let's try to download anything which is not there, like not available .mp3. And as you can see, you again get a message, no file, but we didn't break our code. So far we have handled the exception perfectly. Hey everyone. So in this video we are going to add another functionality, which is the download functionality. So what we want our listener to do now is, let's say we give download space music.mp3 in listener's input. So if there is music.mp3 present in the remote computer, then we want our payload to send the data of the music.mp3 to listener.py, and then using that data, listener.py is going to create a music.mp3 file, and inside it will add the data from payload.py. So we want this to happen. So for that, we are going to add another condition here. So let's say, so our input is going to be something like this. Let's say download music.mp3. So as you can see, the D is at index 0, O is 1, W is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so at index 9, we get our music.mp3 file or any other file that we need to download. So in order to separate the download file name and the download command, we need to at least move our string till uh, you can say 9, right? So we are going to do that, but first let us try to add a condition here. Let's say elif cmd, and as we know that the length of this download string is 8, so the index is going to be 7. So we are going to specify 8 here because we need to specify index plus 1 at the last side of slicing. And now we are going to compare it with download. So if command starts with download, then again we are going to send the command first, and let me just type all this. And after we send the command, we are going to wait for the payload to give us the data. So we are going to, let's say we are going to add file output equals to receive data, the function that we created earlier. And now we have to modify our payload.py. So let's go here and let's add another condition, elif cmd 9, sorry, 9, yeah, 8, sorry, 8 equals to download. So we are going to open the content of the data that we want to download, cmd, and our file name will start at index number 9 because like before, download space music.mp3. So the download is of length 8, so the index is going to be 7, and there is one space here, so 7 plus 1 equals to 8. So our file name is going to start at index 9. So we are going to specify here that cmd9 and semicolons, and we want the file handle to read this data as data, and we want the data to be read. Data read equals to data dot read, and once we have the data stored in data read variable, we want the file to get close, and after that we are going to send this data to our listener. So we are going to do that by just using the function send data and data, and after that we are going to type continue. Now let's just click on save, or we can just do control plus s. And now when we get our data, we want our listener.py to create an empty file of the same name. So we are going to do that by just typing the same command 9, and here we are going to specify write bytes. This as write data, and then we want our write data to write the data given by our payload file output, and after that we are just going to close this file. Good. And now we want our program to continue. So that's it for downloading any file. So let me just recheck it, and I think everything should work fine. Now let's try to run this listener.py, and let us run payload.py as well. Python payload.py. As you can see, we get our connection. Let's try to execute simple commands first. Okay, everything seems to work fine. Let's try to do dir, and let's say I want to download this music file. So it's bullettrain.mp3. But before that, I want you to run this bullet.mp3 on my remote computer, or you can say in the victim machine. So let's try to run this at victim machine first, and so as you can see, it's working fine. Now let's try to download this through our listener. Let's try to download bullet train.mp3. Let's try to hit enter, and we here got an error, and let's see what is this error now. Length of output data and send data. Okay, there is something issue in this payload.file, so we need to fix it. Data read data.close. Okay, we have to specify data read actually, and now it should work fine. Let's try to run this again, and let me clear this, and let's try to run this payload.py again, and now let's try to do dir, and let's try to download this bullet train song again in .mp3. And as you can see, we successfully get our file downloaded, and to verify we can just visit where our listener is stored. So go here, so in this folder, and as you can see, we successfully got the data. Now let me just try to play it. And as you can see, the music is working perfectly, indicating that our download functionality is working fine. So that's all we need to do in order to download any file through our listener and payload. So now we have added a change directory functionality and we have added a download functionality. Now in the next video, we are going to add upload functionality. Hey everyone. So right now we have successfully implemented our download functionality and OS functionality, sorry, change directory functionality. But there is one major issue which needs to be fixed, same as the issue which we have found in this size limit, which is that what happens if we try to download any file which is not present in the remote computer or the victim machine. So let's say if I want to download anything, let's say first of all is dir. As you can see, there are these many files which I can download. But what happens if I try to download any file which is not present here? So let me try to do this. Download is not here dot mp3. So as we know that this no here is not present in this directory. So if I try to run this, and as you can see, our program gets terminated abnormally. So we need to fix. Instead, we want our payload to send, hey, this file is not present here, so that the connections will not get broken. So we are going to again use the concept of try and except, or you can say exception handling. So we are going to do one thing in the payload. The first thing is we are going to try to read data. So this line of code, we will put this in try, this line, and we are going to accept. Uh, Let us see the exception here. So this is the exception, file not found. So if there is no file, then this line of code, exception code, is going to execute. Let me just copy it. You can just right click to copy any terminal uh, text. And now, if there is no file, then we simply want to send hey, no file. Okay, and we are going to save it. And now in the listener.py, we want mm, okay, in the listener.py, we want something to get rid of this value error exception. So if we don't get any data, so let's say we are going to apply a check here. If file output equals to bytes, and what was the data again which we are sending? So no file, right? No file. Then just simply print that output or that error. Let me decode it to string by using UTF-8 decoder. And now just continue. So what this will do is if the file output or if the data received contains this byte which is no file, then it is going to decode it into string and is going to print it on the terminal, and it will continue our program without breaking it. Okay, now let's try to run this again to see if we actually fix this error or not. So first of all, let me try to run listener.py. Good. And now we want to run the payload.py. So let's say python space payload.py. And as you can see, we get the connection. Let's try to execute simple commands. And now let's try to download anything which is not there. So let's say no file.mp3. Now let's see what happens. And as you can see, we get an error message that there is no file or no file, but we didn't break our connection, so we can execute any other command again. But instead here we got the error. And now let's see why we got this error. Because there is data read not defined. because you can see we are performing the dir command, but we shouldn't be doing this way. So we have to visit this code in line number 30 to see what is happening here. Okay, so we need to put this string inside else so that we can run it actually. And now I think everything should work fine. Now let's try to run this again. And let me run this payload.py. The file not found error, invalid syntax. Let me just see. I'm so sorry. Deleted. And else we are going to just paste this send data function again. And sorry, inside send data we are going to send the data read, data underscore read. Now let's save it and let's run this again. As you can see, our connection started perfectly. Now let's try to run simple commands. Now let's try to download anything which is not present there, like error.mp3, and as you can see it is displaying no file. Now let's try to run any other command again, and as you can see now it's working fine without any errors. Let's try to execute more commands like whoami, and let's try to even change the directory to test underscore folder dir, and as you can see everything is working fine now. Hey everyone, so in this video we are going to use the concept of dry, which means do not repeat yourself. As you can see, we are repeating multiple line of code at the same time. Like here we are repeating connection.send, here we are repeating connection.send bytes again, then here we are repeating the same line of code again, and here we are repeating the same line of code again as well. So instead of that, what we want, that we want to reduce the writing of code again and again. So for that, first of all we are going to delete this connection.send from here and connection.send from here, and we are going to cut this line and we are going to paste it here. And now let's try to run this code and see if we broke our code or not. Let's try to run our payload.py here. Let me try to run this through Python, and as you can see we got the connection. Let's try to execute some commands, and as you can see our command is getting executed successfully. Let's try to do UMI. Let's try to do cd dot dot. Let's try to do dir again. Let's try to see if we are handling the exception perfectly. Okay, no, everything should work fine. So this is all we need to do in order to write this code. So instead of writing this line of code again and again in this condition, all of these conditions, we are just writing the code on the second line inside while true. So first of all, it is going to take input and then it is going to send the command, and after that it is going to compare. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we are going to try our payload.py as well. Hey everyone. So in the last video, we have successfully tried our listener.py code, and now we want to try our payload.py as well. So as you can see, there are many lines which are repeating itself. For example, this except file not found, and here this is the same exception again. So to handle that, we are going to do one thing, which is we are going to do something like this. We are going to put every line of code into a try block. Let's say if I did something like this, try to shift all of this inside this try block, and now we are going to handle the exception like except file not found, and if we don't found any file, then we are going to send this line of code, send data no file. this, and we are just going to continue, right? Continue. Now, let me just delete this from here, and this line as well. This whole line actually. To delete of this, and let me just align it perfectly, and then just copy this, and we are going to paste it after this line, and we are going to delete all this, and we are going to add continue, sorry, and we are going to do something like this again. So we are going to delete this try block, and we are going to align it. We just align it perfectly, and as we have handled this exception down, so we don't want this to repeat again. So let me do this, and I think we are good for now. Mm, Now let me try to run this code to see if we've broken our code or not. So let me see, and we are going to do this thing as well. So we are going to handle one more exception, except which is the process dot call process error, and we are going to send this data right. We are going to copy this, and then we are going to paste it here. Oh, sorry, paste it here, and we are going to delete all of these, and we are going to use this function here. Now everything should work fine. So as you can see, we have removed a lot of code from here. Let's see if we are getting our desired output or not. So let me try to run this listener file first. Let's try to run it. As you can see, the server has started. Let's try to run payload.py, and I think we should get to the connection. Now let's try to see if we have handled the um, exceptions perfectly or not. So let's try to do something first dir. As you can see, we are getting the output of the command. Now let's try to traverse to a directory which is not there, like something like this. And as you can see, we're getting the same output as before. And now let's try to download something which is not there, like this. And as you can see, we got the error message again. And now let's try to visit the existing folder. And as you can see, we change the directory. Let's try to dir. And as you can see, our code is working fine.